So this is Quill now. I'm doing a presentation on Asperger's disorder for ED502. So what I'm doing is I'm doing Asperger's because I actually am diagnosed with such myself, but I haven't really put too much thought into my diagnosis over the years. So I was kind of curious to research it and kind of learn more about my own condition. I also have numerous friends and colleagues with Asperger's as well, and I'm going to, as well as the research I did, I'll mention my own and their experiences as well. So starting out with the cause of the exceptionality, the cause and mechanism is not currently known. It's believed it could potentially be genetics or brain abnormalities. Uh, it is a neurobiological disorder. It's not caused by parenting or upbringing. It's also not caused by vaccines, as some have suspected. The history of it was first described in 1940 by a pediatrician by the name of Hans Asperger in Vienna. There's ongoing debate ever since then as to whether it's a less severe form of autism, sometimes referred to as high functioning autism, or as a separate disorder. It's generally considered to be under the umbrella of autism spectrum disorders, and more frequently diagnosed in recent years. It's unclear if it's more prevalent or it's just more commonly detected because of greater awareness among the public and medical professionals. The identification process is that initially parents and teachers will notice differences in social development, language patterns, or odd behaviors. And they can then refer the child to pediatricians and specialists familiar with autism spectrum disorders and Asperger's, who can diagnose based on interactions with the child as well as talking with parents about the development and other adults in the student's life, in the person's life. This is all, of course, talking about for a child being diagnosed. Identification. Person must not have delayed communication or language to count as Asperger's. That would be, by definition, Asperger's does not have delayed language. The DSM-4 specifies uh, severe and sustained impairment in social interaction and the development of restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and activities that must cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Uh, there are some causes of confusion with in that some characteristics of Asperger's can be similar to those of ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, or oppositional defiant disorder. And it is possible for autism or Asperger's can exist alongside the above disorders. I know at least one friend personally who has Asperger's as well as ADHD, and he treats both. I was initially suspected of having ADHD myself, uh, but that's later determined not to be the case. Uh, the characteristics are highly variable between individuals, with numerous common characteristics that individuals typically have some of, but there's not a specific set that all people with Asperger's will be the same in any regard. And again, I can notice this with myself and my friends and colleagues who have had it. We all have somewhat different characteristics, but some things in common. Uh, sensory characteristics are often seen. Some people with Asperger's are hypersensitive to lights or sounds and textures and can easily be bothered by such, while others are hyposensitive, thus they feel less sensation and thus seek out, and thus seek out greater sensory stimulation. Uh, I can again see examples of this myself. Like I haven't really had too much experience of this myself. I've found that certain textures bother me, particularly like the slimy foods such as oatmeal bother me, but that's pretty much it. I have one of my friends has can't stand melted cheese. He loves cheese as long as it's not melted, but he can't have like cheeseburgers or anything like that. He another I myself have long hair and really like the feeling of it. I don't know if that's Asperger's characteristic. There's a lot of people who I suspect that's the case for. Um, whereas I know another friend who can't stand the feeling of hair anywhere on her body and has thus shaved off her head, her eyebrows, her arms, everything, because apparently that makes her feel more comfortable. So she's told me. Uh, Academic skills are actually usually pretty good. Students have good language skills, as mentioned by definition, no delay in language, but they may have unusual speech patterns or inflections. They're less comfortable using speech in social settings or for communication. Good vocabulary, in many cases better than average. No significant cognitive delay. Most possess average or above average intelligence. Good rote memory skills, but struggle with abstract concepts. And again, like the characteristics, these are all uh, depend upon the person. So I personally found that I don't have very good rote memory skills, and I'm reasonably good with abstract concepts. I do have a pretty good vocabulary compared with my peers, especially when I was in school as a child. Um, Social characteristics. This is probably the most prominent part for Asperger's. Uh, those with Asperger's usually want to fit in and be feel socially connected, but they don't know how to do so. They're socially awkward. They don't understand social rules or kind of the unwritten rules of how to interact with people. Often they're said to lack empathy for others. They don't understand how others are thinking or feeling. Um, they struggle often with eye contact and nonverbal communication. Again, most of these are true for myself. I've definitely been socially awkward and felt like an outcast much of my life. I've really struggled romantically, and I think that my Asperger's is probably a contributing factor at least. Um, Personally, I feel like I actually feel a lot of empathy, at least for people I'm close with, but that might be a more recent thing. It wasn't as much the case when I was in when, you when I was at grade school. Um, and then interests. Those with Asperger's often have borderline obsessive interests. Fixated on one particular thing that they like to put all of their thought and effort into, um, often at the expense of really anything else. Uh, in some cases, they like to collect things or objects relevant to that interest. And they're able to memorize facts relative to that interest quite well. Um, Habits. Many people with Asperger's prefer to have set routines and schedules, and they are very uncomfortable if these routines are disrupted. That's not one I've really found myself, but I'm sure that's true for many others. Uh, can have problems with executive functioning and organization, um, keeping themselves organized both in terms of tasks and information as well as physical objects. I probably struggled with that when I was younger, but now I'm actually fairly good with it. Physical characteristics. There's no notable physical abnormalities associated with Asperger's. Often there are motor skills delays, and those with Asperger's can appear to be clumsy and struggle with coordination. That is one thing I've noticed for myself. I'm a bit of a klutz. I've definitely never been any good at any sort of sports. I personally swing dance. I've been doing so for about 7 years now. It did not come easily for me, and even now, despite having done it so long, I don't regard myself as particularly good. But it has certainly helped me feel a lot more coordinated. It's been a very good thing for me and very fun. Uh, Prevalence. Autism spectrum disorder is considered a high incident disorder. Means that it's fairly common. It can typically meet the same standards as non disabled students. And in some cases, the disability might not be immediately apparent. If a person were to interact with, if someone not familiar with the student or the person were to interact with the person with Asperger's, or see them interacting with someone else or going about their life, they wouldn't immediately suspect that the person is Asperger's. Uh, Educational considerations, things that can be done to help them, or ways that these challenges this can provide in classrooms. They have a hypersensitivity to lights and sounds or textures that can cause distractions. Obsessive focus on subjects of interest can be at the exclusion of other subjects. So often students will fixate on one thing and have no interest in various other subjects. Um, Excel in some subjects and struggle in others. They can become frustrated easily by this, by particularly when they have to learn things that don't particularly interest them or they're not very good at. but they also have many strengths and can offer interesting insights. Uh, and one thing also I didn't put on here, but I saw in my research and also can relate to personally is oftentimes they struggle with certain tasks and matters such as, um, for example, math or arithmetic was a huge struggle for me, and the research I read mentioned that that is often a problem. Uh, I struggled immensely with like timed arithmetic sheets. They were the bane of my existence in elementary school. Least restrictive environment. It's typically students are taught in a general education classrooms, you know, and they often exhibit excellent academic skills. So the, they typically don't require working with outside of the or segregated from the regular classroom. Accommodations to help with the needs. Uh, Sensory overstimulation for those sensitive to it should be avoided by seating position or minimizing distracting sounds. One thing to say about all this is that because different people with Asperger's or have different characteristics, these will definitely be a case by case basis on what that particular person needs or how they do. Not something that you can just say all students with Asperger's need this or that. Uh, so others that are hypostimulated can benefit from movement, weighted vests, or other stimuli to help them feel more properly stimulated. Um, Being that many students with Asperger's will uh, fixate and be hyper focused on a particular subject, it's best to not try to pull them away from that interest. Instead, harness this passion for learning other subjects. So make their interest or make the other subjects they need to learn relevant to that particular interest, whatever it may be. Um, Try to minimize frustrating scenarios, or if they are necessary, such as say arithmetic lessons. Provide breaks during them and provide rewards for successful completion. And if the student is getting frustrated or is struggling a lot um, in a given scenario, you can send the student on errands, like taking the attendance sheet down to the office to provide some reprieve from frustrating or challenging situations. Just let them go get a little bit of exercise and movement and a few minutes away. Uh, Tools such as graphic organizers for organization can be helpful in teaching students how to use them and teach strategies for coping and self-calming in frustrating situations or tasks. Um, Social skills are often a larger need. Give social skills training, cognitive behavioral therapy, speech language therapy. You can work with social skills groups, social stories, lunch buddies, friendship groups, and structural social opportunities to help them interact rather than just being closed off or kind of abandoned by the social environment around them. Uh, there's a lot of analysis and learning that can go around social settings, such as social autopsies. I saw that mentioned in one of the resources I was reading. Um, I'm assuming that what that means is to basically analyze social settings that they had, especially those that didn't go well, and say, what went wrong, what did I do wrong, what might have other people been feeling, uh, what was their side of this, what was their side, and so on and so forth. And also, the autistic student should remember that not everything that goes wrong is their fault. Sometimes they don't know what is going on for the other person involved. Teach them the unwritten schools for school or rules for school and social settings, because many neurotypical students will understand these things automatically, whereas uh, students with Asperger's will struggle to understand the kind of the social norms around them if they're not explicitly taught. Uh, Similar with peer mentoring and social communication efforts and coaching. On a slightly different note, because students with Asperger's struggle socially and are socially awkward, they could be victims of bullying. So, school-wide anti-bullying efforts can be to Asperger's students' benefit. Modifications for the classes. It can be helpful to have classes follow a familiar routine, as that's most comfortable for the student with Asperger's. You can notify them in advance if this is to be disrupted so they're not caught off guard. Uh, Environmental manipulations in the classroom to avoid sensory problems, uh, say minimizing noise, uh, even closing a window if there's noise outside that is distracting the student. Um, Papers, projects, and activities can be modified to relate to the student's area of interest, and that'll help them feel less frustrated by it and more interested in it. Sensory breaks can be helpful. Uh, Preparation and coaching for new experiences, whether that's a new person being introduced or a new activity or field trip. If they know what to expect, it'll be less stressful and frustrating for them. And homework and exams can be broken down into smaller steps so that they're easier to approach and less intimidating. For progress monitoring, I wasn't able to find anything online regarding how to do this, specifically for Asperger's. I was only able to find it kind of generically for any kind of disability or IEP setting. But just some I could think of based on everything else I was reading is you can target the struggles of the individual student, both academic and social. So, like I said, there's very different students with Asperger's will have different characteristics, and they need to be taken on a case by case basis of what they specifically struggle with and excel with. And these are the character, and these are the traits that need to be monitored for progress. And some parameters, such as time a student can be on a particular task, especially one that's challenging for them, behavioral outbursts, ability to perform tasks, such as arithmetic, for example, if they struggle with such, uh, can be quantified, and you can track this progress over time. Other parameters, such as social skills, um, are more qualitative. You can't really assign a number to them, but you can still track with written reports and such. Uh, and feedback from other peers, other people that the student interacts with, can also be useful. Assessment impacts or modifications for assessments. Typically, not all that much is needed, but there's depending on the student's needs, several things could be helpful. Extended time in some cases. I was given that myself, but I'm not sure how directly related that was to my Asperger's. I was diagnosed with having a unusual IQ profile and slow processing speed. I think that was more the cause of that rather than the Asperger's itself. Um, if needed, uh, different or simplified formatting. Sometimes lower reading levels was mentioned by numerous sources I read. However, most students seem, however, often those with Asperger's have better vocabularies than their peers, so I don't know why if that would be necessary in many cases. Um, Shortened exams might be helpful in some cases. Multiple choice instead of written answers could be easier, uh, allowing them to select from one of the provided options rather than having to formulate their own response. Um, Different ways of responding, kind of a differentiated instruction exams. For family supports and resources, these are some of the ones I looked at that appeared to have a lot of good resources. Autism Society, Asperger's 101, and Asperger Autism Network. On that note, one that should be avoided is Autism Speaks. It is not well liked by the autism and Asperger's community. It's regarded almost as a borderline hate group, being that they treat Asperger's as if it were a terrible thing, something that something that must be cured. Often with scare tactics, talking about it as something that will ruin lives and so on and so forth. A lot of misinformation. So, and they don't have any, and they don't have very many people with autism in their leadership. So that's something that should be avoided. And then some references.